The screech of the train's brakes split the silence of the early evening, a jarring sound that sliced through the dimly lit metro station. It was 7:45 p.m., rush hour. The station flooded with people. Yet amidst the crowd, there was something else, something more desperate. A small, trembling figure huddled in the corner of the platform. Its fur was matted, its eyes wide with fear and confusion. A German shepherd abandoned alone and unrecognizable from the once proud animal it had been. Leila stood frozen. She had just gotten off the train, and the chaos of the station buzzed around her, but the dog's piercing gaze held her hostage. For a moment, it was as if the world around her fell away, leaving only the rawness of this animal's need. She could see the hesitation in its eyes, the deep, unspoken plea for help. As the train doors closed, and the platform shifted in the sea of commuters, she felt the pang of urgency deep in her chest. She could not turn away. Her hand trembled as she took a step forward. The screech of the train's brakes echoed through the station, reverberating off the walls, and Leila's heartbeat seemed to synchronize with its shrill, jarring sound. It was a sound she had grown all too familiar with in the years she'd lived in the city. People rushed around her, hurrying to their destinations, their footsteps echoing through the cavernous underground station, each person lost in their own rush. Heads down, phones in hand, unaware of anything that wasn't immediately in front of them. Leila was no different. She had just come off a long day at work, the familiar dull ache of exhaustion in her bones, the kind that only the busy, indifferent streets of the city could induce. She was tired. Tired of the constant noise. Tired of the people who never saw each other. Tired of the frantic energy that left her feeling drained. The platform buzzed with life, and for a moment, she wanted nothing more than to melt into the anonymity of the crowd. But then, something caught her eye. It was impossible to ignore. It was a small movement, something almost imperceptible amidst the hurried footsteps, yet it pulled her in like a magnet. A dog, small, trembling, with matted fur, sitting in the corner of the platform. The sheer presence of the creature seemed to slice through the layers of noise and confusion that usually shielded Leila from the world. It was a German shepherd, though its once proud stature seemed reduced to a broken, fearful mess. The dog's fur was tangled and dirty, patches of bare skin visible beneath the grime. Its eyes, wide, fearful and filled with confusion, met Leila's and she froze. The noise of the station, the rush of people, the metallic screech of another train arriving, they all faded into a dull hum in the background as her gaze locked onto the dog's. It was as though time had stopped. The crowd moved around her, indifferent, but she couldn't take her eyes off the small creature, sitting there in the cold, abandoned by everyone. A tight knot formed in her stomach. She took a step forward, her legs moving almost instinctively, and with each step, the knot in her chest tightened. She could see the dog trembling, its ears pinned flat against its head, its body curled tightly in on itself. There was no mistaking the terror in its eyes. This was an animal who had known pain, who had been left behind, discarded in a place where it didn't belong. As she took another step closer, Leila's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel her throat tightening, her breath shallow. She had never been someone to easily give in to emotions. Life had taught her to keep them in check, to push them aside and move forward. But here, now, with this dog in front of her, that instinct to shut everything out was gone. It was like a switch had been flipped. What was she supposed to do? The rational side of her mind screamed at her to walk away, to leave it to the professionals. Animal control, the shelters. They were supposed to deal with these things. She was just one person, one woman in the sea of people passing through this cold, indifferent space. And yet, something about this dog, the way it looked at her with those big brown eyes, full of desperation, refused to let her leave. She felt the weight of the decision pressing on her. She could turn away and pretend she hadn't seen it. She could blame the city's chaos, the crowd, the impersonal nature of modern life. She could convince herself that she was too tired, too busy, that it wasn't her responsibility. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was that she had seen the dog, and now it was up to her to decide what came next. The dog whimpered softly, a sound so faint that it could have been mistaken for the wind. The sound pulled Leila in even closer. Her heart clenched, and the knot in her stomach grew tighter. She wasn't sure when it had happened, but something had shifted. She was no longer an observer, she was a participant. Leila crouched down, lowering herself to the dog's level. She could feel the weight of the moment, the shift in the air around her, the change that would come from this one small act. She extended her hand toward the dog, speaking softly, unsure of what to say. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." Her voice was gentle, but even as the words left her lips, she knew they weren't enough. She wasn't sure if the dog could understand her, but she hoped it could hear the truth in her tone. She wasn't a threat. The dog's trembling increased, but it didn't run. Instead, its eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, Leila noticed that there was something else there, something faint but undeniable, a flicker of trust. It was as though the dog had stopped believing in people, stopped trusting that anyone could help. But now, with Leila sitting before it, something seemed to stir within it, a glimmer of hope. Her hand, still extended, hovered just above its fur. She could see the muscles in the dog's back tense up, ready to spring away at the slightest movement. But she didn't move. She didn't want to scare it further. Slowly, cautiously, she lowered her hand, brushing against its fur. It was rough and unkempt, but there was warmth underneath it. The dog didn't flinch. It didn't pull away. Instead, it exhaled shakily, as though it were letting go of a breath it had been holding for a long time. For a moment, they sat in silence, sharing a space that was suspended in time. There was nothing else in the world, no crowded platform, no impending trains, no rushing people. Just her and the dog. Leila's heart raced, but her mind had begun to clear. She couldn't explain why, but she knew she couldn't walk away. This dog needed her, and, in a strange way, she needed it too. There was something about this moment, this unspoken connection, that called to her in a way nothing else had. She reached out again, this time more confidently, and the dog's tense body relaxed slightly as her fingers made contact with its fur. The moment felt surreal, as if she were outside of time itself. For the first time in a long time, Leila felt something other than the exhaustion and cold detachment she had become so accustomed to in her everyday life. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, the harsh reality of her busy life intruding into the quiet moment. She pulled it out and glanced at the screen, but her eyes didn't really register the words. It was her mother asking when she'd be home. The call could wait. She looked back at the dog, who was now breathing more steadily. The decision had been made. She would help this animal, no matter what it took. The hum of the metro station returned with an unsettling rush of noise. The normal rhythm of the city, the mechanical pulse of life, had resumed. But Leila's world had shifted. As she crouched beside the abandoned dog, the noise of the city faded into the background, like a distant echo in a dream. Everything around her was blurry, unimportant compared to the fragile being before her, its small body quivering with fear, its eyes wide and filled with something beyond panic. She was no longer standing in a station surrounded by strangers rushing toward destinations. This moment, this tiny dog trembling before her, had created an entirely different reality. In this new world, there was only her and the animal, the raw connection between them that neither words nor time could sever. The dog didn't pull away when she touched its fur. It didn't try to run, but its entire body quaked under the weight of fear, as if it had learned that human hands only brought pain. The scratches and scars on its fur told stories of neglect, of a life that had been anything but kind. Leila could feel the weight of those stories, the bruises, both visible and invisible. She ran her hand gently down its back, trying to reassure it, but there was no hiding the pain. This wasn't just a stray dog lost in the crowd, this was a soul in need. Leila felt a deep pang in her chest. How had the dog ended up here? Who had abandoned it? And why? So many questions raced through her mind, but none of them mattered. The only thing that did was this moment, the chance to make a difference. She reached into her bag, pulling out a packet of tissues she kept for herself. She wasn't sure what good they would do, but the dog needed something. The poor thing had been left here, alone, to suffer. The dog's eyes flickered toward her, its gaze filled with confusion. It was almost as if it was waiting for her to hurt it too. Leila could see the hesitation in the dog's eyes. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and spoke softly. "I'm here to help, okay? I won't hurt you." Her voice was gentle, but even as the words left her mouth, she wasn't sure if they could be trusted. How could an animal that had experienced nothing but pain and betrayal believe her? She gently wiped the dirt from the dog's face, careful to avoid its injured ear. Its fur was matted and tangled, a mix of dark browns and blacks. The smell of the dog's body, damp, unclean, lingered in the air, mixing with the sterile scent of the metro station. Despite the grime, there was still a flicker of life in its eyes. The dog was still here, still holding onto something, even if it was only the faintest thread of hope. Her fingers brushed against the dog's ribs, and she felt a sharp breath escape it, pain. The animal had been malnourished, its body fragile and weak. She could see the bones beneath the fur, could feel the hollow spaces where its once strong muscles had atrophied. The signs were clear. This dog hadn't been cared for. It had been left to survive on its own in the cruelest of ways. A wave of anger surged through her. She felt the injustice of it, the unfairness of it. This animal had done nothing wrong, yet here it was, discarded like trash in the coldest, most impersonal of places. Leila felt a knot of fury tighten in her chest. How could anyone do this? How could anyone abandon something so innocent? But the anger didn't last long. Instead, it was replaced with something softer, more resolute. She could feel her heart swelling, her instincts rising to the surface. This dog didn't deserve to suffer. It deserved better, and she was the one who could give it that. The first step was always the hardest. But Leila realized, in that moment, that it wasn't just about this dog. It was about her too. About rediscovering that part of herself she had buried for years. The part that could care, that could feel deeply, that could open her heart to something and someone other than herself. She leaned forward, cautiously, as the dog flinched again, its eyes watching her every move. The tension was palpable. This was more than just an act of kindness. It was a promise. A promise that, no matter what had happened to this animal before, she would be the one to change its story. The dog took another shaky breath, and for a brief moment, it seemed to consider her presence. Its eyes softened, just a fraction, a tiny glimmer of trust in the midst of its fear. It was small, but it was enough. Enough to push Leila forward. Enough to drive her toward the next step. She gently lifted it up, cradling the fragile body in her arms. The dog didn't fight her, didn't struggle. It allowed her to hold it as if it, too, was ready for something different, something better. As Leila stood, her legs wobbled under the unexpected weight, the dog's fragile body resting against her chest. It wasn't much, but it was something. She began to walk through the crowd, the dog in her arms, its body still shaking, but its eyes wide with confusion. With every step she took, the world around her seemed to recede further into the background. The station's noise faded, the faces of the commuters blurred, until all she could focus on was the warmth of the dog against her. Its little body nestled into hers as if it had found a moment of safety. It was strange, she thought, how sometimes the smallest acts could mean the most. And sometimes those acts didn't just change the lives of those you helped, they changed you too. Leila walked with purpose, her steps steady now. She had made the decision. There was no turning back. She didn't know what the next steps would be. She didn't know what would happen when she reached the clinic or what the future held for the dog. But she did know one thing: she wasn't going to leave it behind. Not today, not ever. And for the first time in a long while, Leila felt the stirring of something more than just duty. She felt a deep, raw sense of connection, one that reached across species, across pain, and into a place of profound, unspoken understanding. She wasn't alone, and neither was the dog. As she continued to walk, her mind raced with the possibilities. Maybe this wasn't just about helping a stray dog. Maybe, just maybe, it was about something more. Something she had been searching for without even realizing it. A new beginning, for both of them. The walk to the clinic felt like an eternity. Each step Leila took seemed to stretch out in slow motion, and the weight of the dog in her arms was both a physical burden and an emotional anchor. The busy city around her continued as if nothing had changed, people rushing to their destinations, oblivious to the quiet drama unfolding in the heart of the station. But Leila knew with every fiber of her being that this moment was anything but ordinary. The dog nestled in her arms had stopped trembling. Its breathing, once sharp and shallow, had slowed to a steady rhythm, its small form relaxing against her chest. There was a warmth in the way it leaned into her, as if it was no longer just a frightened, abandoned animal, but a soul finding solace in the one person who had chosen to care. Leila felt a lump rise in her throat. It was impossible to ignore the rawness of the connection between them. It was more than just the physical act of helping. It was something deeper, something that transcended words. She had always been an independent person, strong, self-sufficient, and quick to shut off her emotions when the world demanded it. But the feeling that swelled inside her as she cradled this dog was something different. It was vulnerability. It was trust. It was the kind of quiet, unspoken bond that only grew in moments like these, the ones that stretched beyond reason, beyond logic. In that instant, Leila understood something profound. That it wasn't just the dog that needed saving, she needed this moment just as much. As she walked through the city streets, the world around her seemed to fade into the background. The streetlights flickered softly in the early evening, casting long shadows over the pavement. The air was cooled, the faint scent of rain hanging in the atmosphere. A gentle breeze tugged at her hair, but she didn't notice. Her focus was entirely on the dog. Its small body, so fragile in her arms, seemed to carry with it a weight far beyond its physical form. The weight of all the stories it had yet to tell, all the wounds it had yet to heal. And yet, it was in this silence between them, this fragile, shared moment, that the dog seemed to offer something to her too. There was a calmness in its presence, an unspoken understanding that didn't require explanation. She could feel its eyes occasionally lifting to meet hers, and every time their gazes locked, it was as if the dog was quietly thanking her. It was a connection that transcended the limitations of language, of history, of past experiences. It was the purest form of communication, one that spoke directly to the heart. Leila's thoughts began to drift back to her own life, her own struggles, her own quiet battles. How many times had she walked through the motions of her day, feeling disconnected from the world around her? How many times had she shut down, keeping people at arm's length, telling herself that she was fine on her own? But this moment was different. With this dog, she couldn't hide from the feelings rising inside her. She couldn't ignore the empathy that had bloomed, unexpected and raw, in the space between them. The dog had no voice, but in its silence it had spoken volumes. She finally reached the clinic, a small, unassuming building tucked between two larger storefronts. The fluorescent lights flickered softly above the door, casting an eerie glow over the sidewalk. She pushed the door open, and the warm, sterile scent of the clinic hit her immediately. It was a place that smelled of antiseptic and hope, a place that had seen countless animals come and go, some in need of healing, others simply seeking comfort in their final moments. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, looked up as Leila entered. Her gaze softened as she saw the dog in Leila's arms. "What happened to him?" the receptionist asked, her voice gentle. Leila hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to explain the circumstances, unsure of how much of the dog's story she could truly convey in words. She simply shook her head and replied softly, "I found him at the metro station. He's been abandoned. He needs help." The receptionist didn't ask any more questions. She simply nodded and reached for the phone, calling for the vet to come down. The dog, now gently cradled in Leila's arms, let out a low whimper, as if sensing the urgency of the situation. It wasn't a sound of fear anymore, but of something else, maybe relief, maybe trust. Leila gently set the dog on the examination table, the cool metal surface pressing against its frail body. The vet entered moments later, a tall, slender man with calm eyes. He knelt beside the dog, his movements slow and deliberate as he ran his hands over the animal's body. "Has he been eating?" the vet asked, his hands lingering on the dog's ribs. Leila shook her head, her heart sinking. "I don't know. He didn't look well. I'm not sure how long he's been out there." The vet nodded. "He's malnourished, but he's still alive. That's a good sign." Leila watched intently as the vet continued his examination, his hands moving with the care of someone who had seen too many animals in pain, but who never grew numb to their suffering. He prodded the dog's side gently, noting the faint scars along its abdomen and the patches of missing fur. Leila's heart clenched at the sight. "Whoever did this to him," the vet muttered, shaking his head, "they didn't deserve him." Leila bit her lip, holding back the tears that threatened to spill. She had never understood cruelty in this world, never understood how someone could harm something so innocent, so trusting. But now she understood something else. The dog wasn't just a casualty of someone's neglect. It was a testament to survival, a survivor who had made it this far on its own, and it had been waiting for someone to notice, someone to step in. The vet continued to check the dog's vitals, nodding in satisfaction. "I think he'll be okay," he said, his voice soft. "He's weak, but he's not beyond help. We can start him on a course of antibiotics and get him some food. He'll need time to heal, but he's got a chance." Leila stood there, watching the vet work, her heart swelling with a sense of relief. The dog would be okay. It wasn't just surviving anymore, it was going to live. and for the first time in what felt like forever, Leila felt like she had made the right choice. She had stepped into the unknown, taken a risk, and it had paid off. As the vet stepped away to prepare the treatment, Leila sat down in one of the chairs, her hands still trembling. She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing the weight of the day to settle over her. The dog was in good hands now, but the connection they had shared, however brief, was something she would carry with her for the rest of her life. When she opened her eyes again, the dog's gaze met hers, and for the first time since they had met, the dog's eyes were calm, the terror of the metro station gone. It was a quiet moment, one of understanding, one of peace. Leila smiled softly, knowing that this was just the beginning of something new, not just for the dog, but for her too. The clinic was small, yet it felt vast to Leila. The faint hum of the fluorescent lights and the soft rustle of papers on the desk beside her created a comforting rhythm in the otherwise sterile environment. She sat still, her hands folded tightly in her lap, watching as the vet continued to work on the dog. The tension from earlier had begun to subside, but there was still a weight pressing on her chest, a deep uncertainty gnawing at her. She had done it. She had rescued the dog from the unforgiving chaos of the metro station, taken the first step toward giving it the life it deserved. And yet, despite the relief she felt, something lingered inside her. A tightness in her throat, a sense of doubt. This was only the beginning. She had promised to help, but now the real question loomed large: what came next? The dog was being cared for, but Leila knew that the path ahead wouldn't be easy. The animal's wounds, both physical and emotional, would take time to heal. The vet had spoken of treatment, of recovery, of hope, but Leila knew that wasn't the end of the journey. It was only the start. And with that start, she had to make a decision. The phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her thoughts. She pulled it out and saw her mother's name on the screen. For a moment she hesitated, staring at the call, the familiar comfort of her mother's voice seeming so distant now, so disconnected from the reality she was living in. Leila. Her mother's voice came through the phone, bright and cheery, unaware of the emotional storm Leila was caught in. Leila exhaled, her chest heavy.
Yeah, it's me.
You okay? I was thinking about dinner tonight. Are you coming home? Home. The word felt so foreign to her now, so removed from the rawness of the moment. She thought about the empty apartment, the quiet, sterile space that had once been a place of refuge for her. She thought about the time spent alone, the isolation she had grown so accustomed to. But now everything had changed. There was no going back to the life she had before. Not after today.
I am not sure, Mom.
I'm at the clinic. There's a dog. I found it at the station. It's in pretty bad shape. I'm staying here for a while. There was a brief silence on the other end of the phone before her mother spoke again, her tone softer. A dog. Leila, are you sure? You've got a lot on your plate already. Don't stretch yourself too thin. Leila could hear the concern in her mother's voice. She could feel the weight of it, the unspoken worry that she would overwhelm herself. And maybe she would. Maybe she already had. But in this moment, it didn't matter. The decision had been made, and it wasn't just for the dog. It was for herself too. I know, Mom. But I can't just leave it. It needs help. I'm staying here until it's safe. Please understand. Her mother sighed, the sound heavy with uncertainty. I get it, Leila. But don't forget about yourself, okay? You matter too. I won't forget. Leila replied, her voice quiet. I promise. She hung up the phone, the weight of her mother's words still lingering in the air. It wasn't just about the dog. It was about what this rescue represented, about the deeper need within her to break free from the confines of her own emotional distance. The decision wasn't simple. It wasn't just about saving the dog. It was about saving herself. The vet returned, snapping her out of her reverie. He looked at her, his gaze kind but firm. She'll need some time, he said, gesturing to the dog who now rested comfortably in a small kennel on the counter. But the good news is, she's stable. Her wounds are treatable, and with some food, some rest, and care, she'll make a full recovery. Leila nodded, a small sigh of relief escaping her lips. But that didn't solve the bigger question. Do you have a shelter or somewhere she can go after this? She asked, her voice tentative. She was already bracing herself for the answer she feared. The vet paused for a moment, his fingers brushing through his hair as he considered her question. Well, we have a few places we work with, but I'll be honest with you. There's a long wait list. you might have trouble finding an immediate spot. Leila felt the air in the room grow heavier. The reality of the situation was settling in, and it was a reality she hadn't fully considered. She had rushed into this without fully understanding the logistics. The dog wasn't just going to heal on its own, and finding a safe, permanent home would take more than just a phone call to a shelter. It would take time. Her mind raced, imagining the dog in some overcrowded shelter, a place just as indifferent and cold as the city she had pulled it from. She couldn't do that. She couldn't just hand the dog off and leave it to another unknown fate. The thought of it filled her with dread. But there was another option. One that had been lingering in the back of her mind. A possibility she hadn't wanted to entertain. She could take the dog home. The idea hit her like a thunderbolt. It was reckless, impulsive, and filled her with a mixture of excitement and dread. Could she do this? Could she open her home, her heart, to something so unexpected, so vulnerable? She had no experience with pets, no idea how to care for an animal long term. Her apartment wasn't even ideal for a dog, small, cramped, and solitary. It wasn't a place built for a creature who needed time, love, and care to heal. But at that moment, the decision became clear. She couldn't stand the thought of leaving the dog in a shelter. She couldn't let it fall back into a life of neglect. "Okay," she said, her voice steady now. "I'll take her home." The vet nodded, understanding in his gaze. "It's not going to be easy. You'll need to keep her on a strict feeding and medication schedule. She'll need a lot of attention, especially in the beginning. But I think she'll do well with someone who cares." Leila's heart swelled with determination. She wasn't backing down. Not now, not when she had come this far. As the vet went over the treatment plan and the logistics of her care, Leila felt the weight of the decision settle around her. She wasn't just bringing a dog into her home. She was committing to something larger, to a process of healing, of growth, and of taking responsibility for something beyond herself. The decision had been made. She was in this for the long haul, and as she looked at the dog, lying there quietly in the small cage, she realized that this wasn't just a rescue for the animal. It was a rescue for herself too. Leila's apartment was quiet when she arrived home, the silence settling around her like a heavy blanket. She had expected it to feel comforting, as it always did after a long day, but now it felt isolating. Empty. It had always been a place of solitude, a retreat from the demands of the world. But today it felt different. The stillness was oppressive, a stark contrast to the weight of responsibility she had just accepted. The dog, still weak but steady in her arms, seemed to sense the change in the air. Its small body was warm against her chest, but the energy between them felt charged with anticipation. Leila walked into her living room, her eyes scanning the space for anything that might make the dog feel more at home. She had barely settled in before realizing just how ill-equipped her apartment was for a dog. The space was small, barely enough for one person, let alone an animal that would need room to heal, grow, and thrive. There was a single couch against the wall, the coffee table cluttered with books and papers from her work, and the kitchen area, though clean, felt cramped. The apartment was functional, but not welcoming. It had never been meant for anything more than her. And now, she had a responsibility. Leila gently set the dog down on the floor, watching as it slowly adjusted its legs, uncertain of its surroundings. It gave her a glance, its eyes still filled with the remnants of fear, but there was a flicker of curiosity there too. Leila felt a surge of compassion, mixed with uncertainty. What was she doing? Could she really provide the kind of environment this dog needed? Her phone buzzed again, this time a text from her mother. "Call me when you get a chance, please. I'm worried about you." Leila sighed, leaning against the couch. The weight of the message felt heavy on her chest, like a reminder of everything that had changed in the past few hours. She had made a promise to herself. She wouldn't back down. She had decided to take the dog in, to give it a chance. But the reality of that decision was starting to sink in. She had no idea what she was doing. The dog, sensing her hesitation, padded slowly toward her, its small tail flicking gently in the air. It sat down next to her, its eyes looking up at her with quiet trust, as though it could feel the uncertainty in her. Leila reached out to stroke its fur, her fingers brushing gently along its back. The dog's warmth seeped into her hand, grounding her, offering a sense of calm she hadn't known she needed. But there was more to this than just providing a roof over its head. It needed love, care, patience, and attention. It needed time. Leila's mind raced with the enormity of it all. She didn't know how long the dog had been on its own, or what had happened to it before she found it. She didn't know what its story was, but she knew this: whatever it had endured, she couldn't let it face the rest of its life in pain, in fear. The thought of that made her stomach tighten, and for the first time, she felt a surge of frustration and helplessness. She wasn't prepared for this. She didn't know how to care for a dog, didn't know how to give it what it needed to recover, to heal. She was already stretched thin with her own life, her work, her routine, her responsibilities. How could she possibly take on something this big, something that required so much? The dog whimpered softly, as if sensing her distress, and Leila quickly wiped away the tears she hadn't realized had started to fall. She had to be strong. She couldn't let her emotions control the situation. The dog needed her, and she needed to pull herself together. But the thought of all the unknowns, the logistics of caring for it, the expenses, the time, was overwhelming. The pressure built inside her, a tight knot of panic beginning to claw its way up her throat. She could feel it, the point of breaking, where everything seemed too much, too fast. It wasn't just about the dog anymore. It was about her own fears of failure, of not being enough. The dog, now curled on the floor next to her, tilted its head slightly. Its eyes were calm, steady, as if it had already accepted the reality of its situation. It was here now, in this moment, and it wasn't concerned with what came next. It was present, living in the only thing that mattered, the here and now. Leila took a deep breath, steadying herself. She closed her eyes, letting the quiet of the apartment settle over her. The sound of her own breath, slow and steady, filled the space, grounding her in the present. She didn't need to have all the answers. She didn't need to be perfect. What mattered was that she had made the decision, and now she had to stick with it. She had to trust in herself and in the bond that had already begun to form between her and the dog. This wasn't just about rescuing an animal. It was about learning how to care, how to open herself up to something outside of her own comfort zone. She reached out again, gently running her fingers through the dog's fur. The dog's soft, steady breathing was a quiet reassurance, a reminder that this was not a journey she had to take alone. She could take it one step at a time, one moment at a time. Her phone buzzed once more, and this time she answered it. "Hi, Mom," Leila said, her voice soft but steady. "Leila, I'm really worried about you. I know you've got a lot going on, but are you sure this is the right decision? I don't want you to burn yourself out." Leila paused, the words from her mother sinking in. The concern in her voice was genuine, but Leila knew she couldn't let fear dictate her actions. She couldn't let the weight of uncertainty hold her back. "I'm sure, Mom," Leila said, her voice firm. "I know it's a big decision, but I couldn't just leave it. I've already committed to this. I'll figure it out." Her mother's voice softened. "Just don't forget to take care of yourself too. You matter." "I won't forget," Leila replied, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and resolve. She wasn't just caring for the dog, she was learning to care for herself in a way she hadn't in years. As the call ended, Leila stood up and walked over to the small kitchen. She opened the fridge and pulled out some of the food she had bought earlier in the week. Food that was meant for her own meals, but now it would be for the dog. She prepared a small bowl, setting it down in front of the dog, who sniffed it curiously before beginning to eat. Leila sat down, watching the dog eat. There was something incredibly peaceful in the simplicity of the moment. This was the first step in a long journey, but right now, in this quiet apartment, it was just them. Two beings finding their way through the uncertainty together. And for the first time, Leila didn't feel alone. The first night with the dog was not easy. Leila lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft sound of the dog moving around in the living room. It wasn't that the dog was disruptive, but rather that its presence, its need, seemed to fill the entire space. The dog's quiet, gentle whimpers as it adjusted to its new surroundings sent a wave of anxiety rushing through her. She had promised to take care of it, but now that the reality was sinking in, the weight of the responsibility felt heavier than ever. Leila had never been one to rely on others to ask for help. She prided herself on being self-sufficient, on handling everything on her own. But tonight, she realized how desperately she needed guidance. This was more than just feeding the dog or taking it to the vet. This was about understanding its needs, its trauma, and how to give it the space to heal. She had no experience with animals. She had no idea what it was like to care for a creature that had endured so much pain, so much loss. She grabbed her phone, scrolled through her contacts, and hesitated before dialing the number she had been avoiding all day. It wasn't that she didn't want to call. It was more that she feared the inevitable conversation that would follow. Her mother's concern, her disapproving tone, the endless barrage of questions. But tonight, she couldn't do it alone. The phone rang for what felt like an eternity before her mother answered. "Leila, what's wrong? You're up late." Her mother's voice was soft, but the concern was evident. Leila let out a shaky breath. "Mom, I need help." Her mother paused, and then the worry in her voice deepened. "What's going on? Is everything okay?" Leila hesitated, glancing toward the living room where the dog was now lying on the floor, its eyes half closed in exhaustion. "It's the dog. I'm not sure what I'm doing. I don't know how to help it. I thought I could just take it in, give it a home. But I don't know what it needs. I don't know how to make it feel safe again. I'm scared I'll mess it up." There was a brief silence on the other end of the phone. Her mother took a long breath before speaking. "Leila, you don't have to do this alone. You've made a big decision, and it's okay to ask for help. You're doing something incredibly brave by taking this dog in, but you're allowed to feel overwhelmed." The words felt like a balm to her frayed nerves. For the first time since she'd found the dog, Leila felt a flicker of relief. Her mother wasn't judging her. She wasn't pushing her to back out. She was simply acknowledging the reality of what Leila had done, and in doing so, she gave her permission to feel vulnerable. I don't know where to start," Leila admitted. "How do I help it? How do I make it trust me?" Her mother's voice softened, a gentle, reassuring tone that Leila hadn't realized she needed so desperately. "You're already doing it. Leila, you've taken the first step. Now it's about patience, about letting it know it's safe. It's going to take time, but you don't have to have all the answers right now. The dog doesn't need perfection. It just needs you to show up, to be there, even when it's hard." Leila closed her eyes, the weight of her mother's words settling in. She had been so focused on doing everything right, on solving every problem, that she had forgotten the power of simply being present. "It's not going to be easy," her mother continued. "But you have the strength for this. And if you need help, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm here, and so is everyone else who loves you." Leila felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Her mother's words, simple as they were, wrapped around her like a warm embrace. She had spent so much of her life trying to prove her independence, trying to show everyone that she could handle everything on her own. But in this moment she realized that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign of strength. "Thank you, Mom," Leila whispered. "I just needed to hear that." After a pause, her mother chuckled softly. "Of course, darling. You're not alone in this. You never were." Leila hung up the phone, feeling lighter than she had all day. She wasn't alone. She wasn't expected to have it all figured out. All she had to do was keep showing up, keep doing her best. The rest would follow. She stood up from the bed, her legs stiff from sitting too long, and walked toward the living room. The dog was still lying on the floor, its body relaxed now, its breathing steady. Leila crouched down beside it, running her fingers gently through its fur. The dog looked up at her, its eyes soft, its tail twitching ever so slightly. In that moment Leila understood. The dog wasn't asking for perfection either. It didn't need her to have all the answers. It just needed her to be there, to offer the small things, gentle hands, a safe place and time. She smiled down at the dog, her heart full. "We'll figure this out together," she whispered. "One step at a time." The dog let out a quiet sigh, settling its head back down on the floor. Leila leaned back against the wall, her heart swelling with something she couldn't quite name. She had taken the first step, and that was enough. But the next step, that would come tomorrow, and the next day after that. She would keep moving forward, one moment, one step at a time. The next morning arrived with a quiet stillness that felt almost unnatural. Leila woke up earlier than usual, her body stiff from a restless night spent tossing and turning. The bed, once a place of solitude, now felt strangely empty without the sound of the dog's breathing to accompany her. She had spent hours trying to comfort it last night, reassuring it with every gentle stroke of her hand, every soft word she could muster. It had calmed down eventually, resting its head on her lap. trusting her in a way she hadn't expected. But as the sun began to rise and the first light of day crept through the curtains, the weight of what she had committed to hung in the air like a heavy fog. The dog's presence, though a comfort, also reminded her of everything she hadn't yet figured out: how to make the dog feel truly at home, how to ensure its recovery, and how to balance this new responsibility with the already full life she had. She dragged herself out of bed, the morning chill settling around her like an unwelcome guest. The dog was curled up on the couch, its fur still unkempt but its body no longer trembling. There was something remarkably still about it, as though it had decided that it could finally rest, that it could trust this temporary space to be a place of peace. Leila moved quietly through the apartment, pulling out the small bowl she had used to feed it the night before, and carefully filled it with water and the soft food the vet had recommended. She set it down in front of the dog, watching as it slowly lifted its head, eyes groggy but alert. There was a hesitation in its movement, as if it wasn't quite sure whether this was another fleeting moment of kindness or something more lasting. It sniffed at the bowl before it began to eat, slowly at first, then with more urgency, as if the hunger it had felt for so long had been buried deep within its frail body. Leila stood there, watching the small miracle unfold before her eyes. It wasn't just the dog eating, it was something more. It was the evidence of life returning, of healing, of survival against all odds. The dog looked up at her between bites, its eyes meeting hers for the briefest moment, a quiet acknowledgement of the unspoken bond between them. Leila's heart swelled in her chest, and in that moment, she realized something profound. This wasn't just a dog she was helping. It was a journey they were both on together. And maybe, just maybe, this was the kind of companionship she had been seeking without knowing it. Leila sat down on the floor next to the dog, careful not to startle it. She had seen the way it reacted to sudden movements, its body tensing, its muscles ready to flee. But now, as it finished its meal, it seemed more at ease, more grounded. She gently ran her hand across its back again, this time with more confidence. The dog didn't pull away. This was a breakthrough, a small, quiet miracle. She knew it wouldn't be easy. She knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges, getting the dog to trust her fully, helping it overcome its past trauma, dealing with the emotional scars that she could see in its eyes, and the physical ones she couldn't. But for the first time, she felt like there was hope. The dog wasn't just surviving anymore. It was starting to thrive. Leila took out her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen. She had been hesitant to reach out to anyone else, friends, family, even her coworkers. But this morning, she felt like it was time to open up. She needed advice, maybe even a little reassurance. She wasn't sure how to handle the next steps, but she couldn't do this alone. She called her best friend, Sarah, who had always been the more spontaneous one, the one who threw herself into new experiences without thinking twice. "Sarah, you won't believe what I've done," Leila said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Tell me everything," Sarah replied with a laugh that made Leila smile despite herself. Leila paused, unsure of how to begin. "I found a dog. At the metro station it was abandoned, and now I've brought it home. And I'm just—" She stopped herself, taking a deep breath. "I'm overwhelmed." There was a pause on the other end of the phone. Then Sarah spoke, her voice soft but supportive. "Leila, that's huge. But you know what? You've got this. I can hear the way you're talking about it. It's clear this dog is meant to be with you." Leila's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't realized just how much she needed to hear those words, how much she needed to believe in herself. "I don't know what I'm doing, Sarah. I've never had a pet. I don't know the first thing about taking care of a dog." "You don't need to know everything right away," Sarah said, her voice grounding. "You just need to keep doing what you're doing. Love it, give it time, and figure it out together. You've already made it this far. One day at a time, right?" Leila chuckled, her shoulders relaxing as the weight of her uncertainty lifted just a little. "Right. One day at a time." They talked for a few more minutes, Sarah offering her support and advice, reminding Leila that it was okay to ask for help, that it was okay to take things slow. When the conversation ended, Leila felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had a long road ahead of her, but she wasn't walking it alone. There were people who cared about her, people who would help when needed. As she looked down at the dog, now resting peacefully on the couch after its meal, Leila realized that this small miracle was just the beginning. The healing had started, not just for the dog but for herself too. She had taken a chance, stepped outside of her comfort zone, and in return, she had found a quiet companion. A companion who needed her, and whose need was teaching her how to open up, how to care in a way she hadn't allowed herself to before. The dog's breathing was steady now, its body fully relaxed. Leila stood up and grabbed a blanket from the couch. Carefully draping it over the dog, it didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, it simply curled up under the warmth, its body no longer tense, its heart no longer racing. Leila stood there for a moment, watching the dog sleep. She didn't know what the future held for them, didn't know if she could fully heal all the wounds the dog carried. But she knew one thing: she wasn't alone. And neither was the dog. The days that followed were both the slowest and the fastest of Leila's life. The dog, whom she had begun calling Max, settled into the routine of her apartment, its quiet presence now a constant in her daily life. Each morning, Leila would wake early, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a heavy coat. But each day also brought a small triumph. Max was healing slowly but surely. His fur, once matted and tangled, began to shine again, and the hollow look in his eyes gradually softened. He still flinched at sudden movements, but there were moments when his gaze lingered on hers with something approaching trust. Leila hadn't realized how much she needed this. She hadn't realized how much of herself she had been missing, how much she had been avoiding, until Max came into her life. The quiet companionship, the soft patter of his paws on the floor, the small moments when he would nuzzle her hand or rest his head on her lap, made her feel more connected to the world than she had in years. But it wasn't easy. The first few weeks were a blur of care, routines, and constant adjustment. Leila was learning on the fly. How to deal with Max's food allergies, how to manage his recovery, how to calm him during the night when his dreams would twist into something dark, pulling him into anxious whimpers. The vet had warned her that it would take time for Max to heal, emotionally as much as physically, and Leila could see that the dog carried more than just the scars on his body. The way he flinched at the sound of a car door slamming, the way he would curl into a tight ball when she left the room, these were signs of trauma, of a life lived in fear and uncertainty. Max's recovery was slow. Leila learned to be patient, to take things one day at a time. She also realized that healing wasn't a one-way street. Max was teaching her something she hadn't known she needed. Through his quiet presence, he was teaching her how to let go of her own walls, how to stop hiding from the world, how to embrace the messiness of life, the uncertainty, the fear, the imperfections, and still move forward. One Saturday morning, after weeks of quiet progress, Leila decided it was time to venture outside. The weather had been crisp, the kind of fall morning that begged for a walk through the park, and she realized it had been days since Max had stepped foot outside. He needed the fresh air, the change of scenery. She needed it too. Leila wasn't sure how Max would react. She had avoided taking him outside for fear that it would overwhelm him, that the world would feel too big, too loud for him. But today, she felt a pull in her chest, a need to show him that there was more to life than the confines of the apartment. She leashed him gently, watching his reaction closely. At first, Max stood still, as if unsure of the new thing attached to his collar. But when she gave the leash a gentle tug, he took a step forward. Leila's heart skipped. He was trusting her just a little bit. "Come on, Max," she whispered, the words soft, but filled with meaning. Max hesitated for a moment, then followed her out the door, his paws tentative on the pavement. The world outside was louder than he remembered, filled with sounds that had once been sources of fear. Cars whizzing by, children laughing, the distant hum of a bus's engine. But this time it wasn't overwhelming. Max stayed close to Leila, his body relaxed but alert, his ears perked as he scanned the world around him. For a moment, Leila stopped walking, letting Max take in his surroundings. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the sidewalk, and the crispness of the air seemed to fill her lungs in a way that felt like a long-needed breath. She turned to look at Max, his tail wagging slightly now. He was adapting, just as she was. They walked slowly, each step a small victory. Leila marveled at the way Max moved now, more confident, less fearful. He still flinched at the occasional car, still hesitated when they crossed a loud intersection, but he kept moving forward, and so did she. Together, they were learning how to step into a world that had been too harsh, too unforgiving for too long. As they reached the park, Leila found a quiet spot beneath a tree and sat on the bench, watching the leaves swirl gently in the breeze. Max laid down beside her, curling into the cool grass, his eyes half closed in contentment. There was a peace in this moment, in the simplicity of being outside, of sharing a space with no expectations other than just being. Leila closed her eyes for a moment, the sounds of the world around her blending into a soft hum. She had spent so much of her life chasing after things, chasing after success, after approval, after the perfect image of who she was supposed to be. But here, in this moment, there was no chasing. There was no need to prove anything. It was just her and Max learning how to live again. And then Max shifted, lifting his head and looking at her with those soft, trusting eyes. It was the first time since they had met that she saw something else in his gaze, something beyond fear. There was curiosity now, and maybe even hope. For the first time, Leila felt like they were both moving forward, not just in the physical sense, but emotionally, too. They sat there for a while, the sunlight growing softer as the day wore on. Leila felt the weight of the decision she had made settling deeper within her, no longer a burden but a choice she was proud of. The dog had come into her life for a reason, and while she didn't know exactly where their journey would take them, she knew they would take it together. It wasn't perfect, it would never be, but this was real. This was something worth fighting for. And in that moment, Leila realized that she wasn't just rescuing Max, he was rescuing her too. The days had been passing in a blur of small victories and slow progress. Leila had adjusted to the rhythm of life with Max, and the apartment that once felt so empty now seemed to echo with the sound of paws on the floor, the soft jingle of his collar as he followed her around the house. Every morning, Max would wake her up with his gentle nudges, a reminder that this wasn't just her world anymore, it was his too. But in the quiet moments of her day when the world seemed to slow down, a feeling she had been trying to ignore began to surface, a feeling of unease, of something unspoken yet undeniable. It was the realization that as much as Max had become a part of her life, as much as she had poured herself into caring for him, there was an inevitable truth she couldn't escape: she wasn't meant to keep him forever. Leila had known this from the start, of course. She had promised to help him, to give him a safe place, to be his caretaker until he was ready to move on. But that promise was easier made than kept. The bond between them had deepened in ways she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about saving a dog, it was about finding a companion, someone who understood her in ways no one else could. Max had become a part of her world, a quiet presence that made everything feel a little less lonely, a little less uncertain. But now, as the days passed, Max was no longer the scared, emaciated dog she had found on the metro platform. He had gained weight. His fur was soft and shiny, and his eyes no longer carried the fear they once did. He had blossomed in her care, and the time had come for him to move on, to find a permanent home where he could truly flourish. Leila stood in the kitchen one evening, staring at the phone in her hand. It had been weeks since she had contacted the animal shelter to inquire about finding Max a home, and she had been avoiding their calls, too afraid to face the inevitable. She knew what they would say: they had found a family who was interested in adopting him, a family who had the time, the space, and the experience to give him everything he needed. But the thought of letting go of Max, of handing him over to someone else, was harder than she had imagined. She could still hear the first time he had looked at her with trust, the way his tail had wagged ever so slightly when she'd given him his first real meal, the way he had curled up beside her on the couch, seeking her warmth. It felt like just yesterday, and yet, here they were, at the crossroads where love and responsibility collided. Leila had always been independent, always prided herself on doing everything alone. But Max had shown her the kind of love that asked for nothing in return. No expectations, no judgments, just the pure, unfiltered joy of being cared for. He had healed her as much as she had healed him. She heard the sound of paws padding down the hallway, and Max appeared at the doorway, his eyes wide and expectant. He looked up at her with those familiar, trusting eyes, and for a moment, Leila forgot everything else. There was no doubt in her mind that she loved this dog with every part of her being. But she also knew that love meant doing what was best for him, not what was easiest for her. The decision had already been made, and now she had to honor it. She sat down on the couch, patting the spot next to her, and Max climbed up beside her, settling into his usual spot. He was quiet still, sensing the shift in the air. Leila rested her head against his, taking in the familiar warmth of his body, the softness of his fur. For a few moments they just sat there together, surrounded by the quiet of the apartment, the weight of the moment hanging between them. "Max," she whispered softly, her voice catching in her throat, "I'm so proud of you. You've come so far. You're not the same dog you were when I found you. You're strong, and you're ready for a new chapter. And I'm going to make sure you get the life you deserve." Max looked up at her, his eyes filled with something that felt like understanding, as if he knew exactly what she was saying. He nuzzled his head against her hand. And Leila's heart clenched with the tenderness of it all. How could she ever let go of something that had become such a part of her life? But then she thought of the family waiting for him, a family who had space in their home and in their hearts for Max. They would give him the love, the attention, and the stability that he needed. They would be his forever family, the ones who would give him a chance at a life free from fear, a life full of the love he deserved. The doorbell rang and Leila's heart skipped. She knew who it was. The family was here. She stood up slowly, her legs feeling heavy, and opened the door. The family stood there, smiling warmly, a mother, father, and two young children, their faces full of excitement. The mother knelt down to Max, her voice soft and gentle as she called his name. Max, sensing that something was changing, walked over to her hesitantly, sniffing her hand before giving it a tentative lick. Leila stood in the doorway, watching the scene unfold in front of her. She could see the bond beginning to form between Max and this new family, a bond that would grow with time, just as hers had with him. And though her heart ached with the pain of letting go, she knew that this was the right thing to do. Max was ready for this, and so was she. "Goodbye, Max," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll always love you, and I'll never forget you." The family smiled at her, understanding the sacrifice she was making. The mother reached out to Leila, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Thank you," she said softly. "You gave him the chance he needed. We'll take good care of him, I promise." Leila nodded, her throat tight. "I know you will. I'm just glad he's found his home." The family walked out the door, with Max following them, his tail wagging for the first time in weeks. As they disappeared down the hallway, Leila closed the door behind them, her eyes filling with tears. She had done it. She had given Max the life he deserved, and though it hurt, though her heart ached with the emptiness left behind, she knew it was the right decision. Leila stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space where Max had once been. The apartment felt quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now, one that held no regrets, only the peace of knowing she had done everything she could for the dog who had changed her life. The days after Max left were harder than Leila had anticipated. It was the silence that got to her first. The apartment, once filled with the soft padding of paws on the floor, now echoed with a hollow quietness that seemed to permeate every corner. Leila would wake up in the morning, the space beside her empty, and for a brief moment, she'd forget that Max was no longer there. Then the reality would crash down on her again, and the emptiness would settle in her chest. But there were no tears left to cry. The goodbye had been the hardest thing she had ever done, and though her heart still ached, she knew it was for the best. Max was in a good place, a family who could give him everything he needed, and she had made a difference in his life. That was the truth she clung to in the quiet mornings and the lonely evenings. The weeks passed in a blur. Leila returned to her routine, but it wasn't the same. Something was missing, and though she had tried to ignore it, she couldn't. She was still processing the loss, still learning how to live without the constant presence of Max, without the responsibility of caring for him. It felt strange, almost surreal, to walk through her day without thinking about his needs, without worrying about his recovery. But life moved forward, and so did she. One crisp Saturday morning, about a month after Max had left, Leila found herself standing on the same park bench where she and Max had spent so many afternoons. The trees were still vibrant with autumn colors, the leaves swirling gently in the breeze, and the sun shone down in a way that made everything feel still, peaceful. It was a quiet morning, the kind that felt sacred, and Leila found herself drawn to this place once again. She had come here before, after Max's departure, but it hadn't felt right. She had come with the weight of loss still hanging over her, the absence of the dog still sharp and painful. But today was different. Today, there was a sense of resolution, a sense that she had come full circle, that the journey she had begun with Max had taken her to a new place, a new understanding. As she sat on the bench, letting the cool breeze settle around her, Leila felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had let go of the fear that had once held her back. The fear of making mistakes, the fear of not being enough. She had loved Max with everything she had, and in return, he had shown her what it meant to truly live in the moment, to embrace the messiness of life, to be vulnerable. Max had healed her just as much as she had healed him. Leila closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sunlight wash over her face, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything she had learned through this journey. She had given Max the chance to live the life he deserved, but in doing so, she had given herself a chance to change, to grow, and to rediscover a part of herself she had lost along the way. The sound of footsteps approaching drew her attention, and when she opened her eyes, she saw a figure walking toward her, someone she recognized. It was the family who had adopted Max. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected to see them here, but as they came closer, Leila stood up, her feet suddenly feeling unsteady. The mother smiled warmly as she approached Max, walking happily beside her, his tail wagging. "Leila," the woman said, her voice filled with warmth. "We've been meaning to come by and thank you again. Max has been such a joy in our home. He's really become a part of our family." Leila smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. Max looked up at her with familiar eyes, his coat shining in the sunlight, his body strong and healthy. He was a different dog, no longer the scared, trembling animal she had found on that metro platform. He was happy, content, loved. Leila crouched down, holding out her hand to him, and Max bounded toward her, his tail wagging furiously. She ran her fingers through his soft fur, the familiar warmth of him flooding her with memories of their time together. It felt like a lifetime ago, and yet, it felt like no time had passed at all. "I'm so glad to see him like this," Leila said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "He looks so happy." "He is," the mother replied, her smile wide. "He's a different dog now. We're all so grateful to you for giving him the chance to heal." The words hung in the air between them, simple but profound. Leila hadn't expected to feel this sense of closure, this peace in seeing Max so well, so happy. But in that moment it felt right. It felt like everything had come full circle. The family spent some time talking with Leila, sharing stories about Max's progress, his little quirks, and how he had adjusted to life with them. Leila listened intently, her heart full, knowing that she had made the right choice. She had given Max what he needed, and in return, he had given her more than she could ever express. As they prepared to leave, the mother turned to Leila once more. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "You've given him a new life, and we'll always be grateful for that." Leila nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "Thank you for giving him the love he deserves. He's found his home with you." With that, the family left, walking down the path with Max happily trotting beside them. Leila watched them go, the knot in her chest easing, the weight of her decision finally lifting. She had done what was best for Max, and in doing so, she had also done what was best for herself. She stood there for a long time, taking in the scene, the bright, crisp morning, the sunlight casting long shadows across the park, the peace that had settled in her heart. Max was happy, the family was happy, and for the first time in a long while, Leila felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had given, and in return, she had received more than she could have imagined. It wasn't the end of the journey. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was an ending nonetheless, an ending full of lessons learned, of love given and received, of a bond forged in the most unlikely of places. Leila turned to walk back toward her apartment, her steps light, her heart full. She was ready for whatever came next, knowing that no matter where life took her, she would always carry Max with her, in her heart, in her memories, in the lessons he had taught her. And as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the park, Leila felt a quiet peace settle around her, a peace that came from knowing she had done something real, something meaningful, something that would last.